The original Crysis is one of those games that I started but never finished several years back, even though I did play through and enjoy the other two installments. So I decided to revisit it and see if it has anything to it other than the fancy graphics. I mean, if you're familiar with Crysis at all, it's likely that you're aware of how impactful the visuals were when this released, but we'll get into that more momentarily. Before that, I just want to briefly mention that I created a new YouTube channel specifically for voice acting content. I do intend to eventually move all of my voice acting related stuff over there, just so things are more organized, and because I understand if some of you just don't give a shit about that. But until it gains enough of a following, I'm gonna leave that stuff here for now. The link is in the description, and I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe over there and check it out if it's something you feel like you'd be interested in. I'll talk about that a little more at the end of the video, but for now, let's check out some gameplay and talk about Crysis. The game was developed by Crytek, who worked on the first Far Cry game prior to this, and are also presumably responsible for the Y where the I should be in the game's title. Ha ha. I don't want to devote too much time to discussing the visuals in Crysis, as I'd say that most people who are even moderately familiar with this game are aware of how impressive these graphics were for 2007, when it was initially released. I mean, the game really is more famous for its graphics than anything else, and having a PC that could run this thing smoothly back in the day seems to have been quite the rarity. However, I did end up playing through the remastered version of the game on Xbox Series X, which honestly is not very impressive for a remastered version. You literally still have to choose between smooth frame rate and visual fidelity on the Xbox Series X for a 16-year-old game. What the f***? The least they could do for a remaster is give you the best possible visuals in conjunction with 60 frames per second, but I guess that was somehow too much to ask. Anyways, this isn't meant to be a review of the remaster, but that just frustrated me. Regardless though, as a result of the detailed graphics, a few other aspects of the presentation seem to have been neglected, most notably the sound design. Note that I'm not talking about the voice acting here, that's fine, just the general sound quality is not great. Perhaps the best indicator of this is the sound effects for gunfire. The guns don't sound good or impactful to begin with, but there's also exactly zero reverberation after you fire them. We're in a fucking jungle for Christ's sake, but the moment you let go of the trigger, the sound immediately stops. Pretty sure that isn't how guns work. The other piece of this that I want to mention is something that actually impacts the gameplay quite substantially. As we'll discuss later, the stealth in this game is flawed. But for now, I just want to mention that there is absolutely zero indication of when an enemy has spotted you, just in terms of audio cues. In most games, you'll either be able to hear enemies discussing amongst themselves if they feel like they see something prior to actually engaging you, or you'll get some kind of audible ping to let you know that you've nearly alerted an enemy, or sometimes a mixture of both. This is so that you have at least somewhat of a chance to remain hidden and avoid being spotted. In Crysis though, enemies only give you an indication that they've spotted you after they're already firing at you. We'll talk about that more later, but I wanted to mention this within the context of presentation as I feel it fits in here better. From a narrative perspective, there's honestly nothing too exciting about Crysis, unfortunately. We begin with a pretty uninteresting squad of soldiers outfitted in these nanosuits that grant them special abilities like invisibility and maximum armor, and also just general physical enhancements to things like running speed and jump height. Reactor team, as your squad is known, is sent in following a distress call from a team of archaeologists who we soon discover have stumbled upon some pretty f***ed up shit. Namely, some big alien squid things in a giant structure of unknown origin. How pleasant. Now, despite the rather immediate reveal of alien creatures, we'll spend most of Crysis dealing with the North Korean army who want a piece of the alien action for some reason. As a matter of fact, it is kind of laughable how various members of your squad just kind of write off the alien threat even after several of you are butchered by said threat. Like they act kind of shocked for a moment after seeing a giant unidentified flying squid creature, but they move on from this so quickly it's just kind of ridiculous. That said, I wasn't necessarily anticipating some Uncharted level narrative here, but it's passable. Nothing in Crysis is likely to leave you hanging off the edge of your seat story-wise, but it also isn't horrible. Basically, the story in this game is nothing to write home about. But it isn't awful, and I'd say it's inoffensive for the most part. So the gameplay in Crysis absolutely never managed to outshine the visual presentation, at least as far as general perception is concerned. But of course, that doesn't mean that it's inherently bad. Perhaps the most obvious feature from a gameplay standpoint is the nanosuit itself and the various abilities it allows the player. The running speed and jump enhancements are likely what you'll be dealing with most often to traverse the often large and open jungle environments. But unfortunately, the movement controls just aren't very fluid, and it often feels sluggish and awkward to control in general. Crysis was ostensibly designed as a PC game first and foremost, so I'm not sure if these issues would persist if you played on a PC, but in my experience playing on Xbox Series X in 2023, it doesn't feel good. First off, the transition from sprinting to normal movement is so abrupt that this motherfucker Nomad must have some serious whiplash at this point. I appreciate how fast the enhanced sprint speed is, and I don't necessarily think that the recharge timer should have been faster. I just feel like they could have somehow bridged the gap between moving like you have a stick up your ass and moving like a cheetah on cocaine. Maybe this isn't the biggest deal in the world, but when you have to spend a lot of time moving in a game, which I suppose is true of most games, it becomes more than a slight annoyance. The jumping is also quite atrocious feeling. Sure, you can jump high, but momentum means fuck all in this game. No matter how fast you're going prior to jumping, you'll go at best like 1 yard max. This is a game from 2007 though, so I suppose I can cut it a bit of slack as the whole FPS movement thing really wasn't standardized at all by this point. We'll get to the other suit abilities after I go over a little bit of the basics regarding this game's combat. As for the general shooting, it feels pretty good. The ragdoll physics for dead enemies are awesome, and it gives your actions a lot more impact. One thing I'll say though is that it can be kind of hard to tell if you're even hitting your enemies at times. This is one game that could definitely benefit from some hit markers, and luckily, this was rectified in both of the sequels. Enemies seem to be fairly intelligent. I mean, they don't have any fear level AI or anything even close, but they're decent at hunting you down and flanking you. I think that if the movement controls were way more fluid and responsive, this combat would be pretty damn fun. I mean, I see what they were going for. In an ideal world, you'd be running around from cover to cover, jumping 20 feet over guys' heads, and just generally being a badass. But it just doesn't feel quite as good as I feel like it potentially could. There is some limited environmental destruction, as you can take down little sheds and destroy certain buildings, which I felt actually added a lot to the combat. Especially when it comes to what is without a doubt the coolest part of Crysis, picking up and throwing sons of bitches. Your suit's enhanced strength allows you to just walk right up to guys, grab them, and toss them around like it's nothing. In all seriousness, it is really badass to throw some unlucky dude off a giant cliff or into a shed that topples onto him afterwards. The melee attack is like super wimpy though in comparison. It's like your guy has T-Rex arms or some shit, as half the time you won't even hit the enemy unless you're breathing down his neck. As far as weaponry is concerned, you don't have too much to choose from. A few assault rifles, submachine guns, shotguns, stuff like that, but I didn't necessarily feel like it was lacking too much as a result of this. All of the weapons feel pretty much how they should. If you disregard the shoddy sound effects, which we discussed earlier, shotguns in particular are a lot of fun to mess around with considering the ragdoll physics I mentioned earlier. On top of that, this game has definitively the coolest weapon customization system ever. Not necessarily because of the options you have, just because it's all done in real time. You don't have to traverse through some cumbersome menu or anything like that. You just literally press a button and you have all of your options on display, so you can switch stuff up mid-combat if necessary. Assuming this is the first game to utilize this system, a shit ton of FPS games went on to blatantly copy this, with Battlefield 2042 being one recent example. Maximum armor is one skill that you can utilize during firefights. This essentially reduces your speed but renders you essentially invincible until it runs out. The more damage you take, the quicker it runs out. This is a pretty damn useful skill, and I like the reduced movement speed as a trade-off for taking less damage. I suppose I should talk about the stealth gameplay employed here, though I'm having a hard time even referring to it as such. So you do have the option of going invisible for a limited time. Granted, you don't move too quickly or fire your weapon, but in most enemy encounters this is just flat out useless. The main reason for this is because this is one of those games where it is quite literally impossible to take down a single enemy silently without everyone else and their fucking mom somehow noticing. And they don't just notice, but also have your exact location and are already firing like 5 bullets in your direction. So yeah, stealth is quite literally impossible. There's no stealth takedown in sight, and despite almost every gun having a silencer attachment, you'll still reveal your position even if you use one, so it's hardly worth even bothering with. In a few cases, I did manage to use invisibility to just sneak by entire enemy encampments that I didn't have to engage, but I wouldn't classify those instances as particularly fun. Invisibility can be useful to get the drop on enemies, and I did find myself approaching most combat situations cloaked so I could attack from the right angle, but as for actual stealth gameplay, Crysis just doesn't have it. I did just briefly brush on one thing this game does really well though, which is the dynamic enemy encounters. In a lot of cases, you can really choose how you want to approach your enemies, and you have a lot of freedom in combat just generally speaking. When moving from objective to objective, you'll often have pretty big areas to traverse through. But these areas are broken up pretty well with enemy encampments and other diversions to keep things from getting boring. Your objectives are more or less always linear, but you can kind of choose how you want to go about reaching them, which I thought was a pretty neat touch. There is also the matter of the ending portion of the game to contend with. So after the alien creatures are officially unearthed near the end of the game, things became way more restrictive and linear, and you're forced to do near constant battle with these aliens that are honestly just uninteresting. It starts to feel kind of like a Call of Duty campaign or something here, but it really just lacks the polish to make this kind of linear storytelling and action work. Obviously, I don't mean visual polish, I mean like gameplay polish. Sure, the spectacle of it can be pretty cool, and I'm sure this was especially the case in 2007, but that doesn't make it fun, or worth your time for that matter. This section also includes the most aggravating vehicle segment in the history of video games, when you have to fly this piece of shit VTOL for no reason. Like, why would they even bother including a flying segment in this game if it's going to be so bad that it makes me want to fly the stupid thing into hell? Honestly, I don't even want to talk about it. I think it's likely that you can tell what I mean just by watching. The very first Crysis game is by no means a bad one, but I can't really recommend it in 2023. I did have some fun with it, but I just don't think modern gamers will find it as exciting as it was back in 2007. The visuals have certainly stood the test of time, but I don't think the gameplay is quite as groundbreaking or enduring, unfortunately. That's pretty much all I've got for Crysis, but like I said in the intro, I would really appreciate if you would consider checking out my new YouTube channel. The link is in the description, of course. As of right now, it doesn't have any exclusive content. I've just essentially re-uploaded all of my voice acting related stuff onto that channel just so it's its own thing and everything is kind of organized over there. But as soon as we start gaining some traction over there, I'll definitely do some exclusive stuff, and eventually I do plan to move everything voice acting related over there. Once that happens, I'll stop annoying you guys about it, but for now, please consider checking it out. And I also want to thank all of you for the support on this channel. We're at nearly 350 subscribers, I think, at the time of recording, which is awesome, so I really appreciate it. It'd be pretty awesome if we could get to 1,000 and I could get some monetization action. But either way, it's been really awesome to see the increase in support of this channel recently, and I really appreciate all of you guys who have checked it out. Alright, that's about it. Leave a comment, let me know what you thought about this video, let me know how you're doing, I don't know. Like and subscribe if you would like to, if you want to see more stuff like this, and if you want to support the channel. Alright, I'll see you when I see ya. Bye.